the previous experiences, it stands as a public secret that within the months of April, May, and September, the rivers Nyamwamba and Nyamugasani just keep on flooding, thus wreaking a lot of havoc. And this goes through the incised gorges and valleys of River Nyamwamba and Nyamugasani, thus causing a number of deaths and destruction of property. And it is a readable pattern you could ever even imagine. We are talking about months just as May 1st, 2013, went to May 3rd, the year 2014, went to 7th May, year 2015, and the pattern can go on and on and on. And joining us on set to be able to discuss the changing patterns of weather and climate in Uganda and its impact on people is James Muhindo. He will tell us his title here at the Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment in Uganda. James, a very warm welcome on set.
Thank you very much for hosting me. My name is James Muhindo. I'm the National Coordinator of the Civil Society Coalition on Oil and Gas here at ACORD, and I'm a lawyer by profession. And by some stroke of luck, I also come from Kasese. So the rivers in question and now the Lake Victoria here are things I have been following closely, both in real life but also professionally, in terms of their impact on the environment and nature and how it's impacting livelihoods around those natural resources.
Let us go with the far things first, James, here. How did we come to this?
First, these rivers busting banks, and right now Lake Victoria extending its shores to a record high ever since recorded history. This serves to show that climate change is real, notwithstanding other small causes that are contributing to this. It's clear that the impact of climate change cannot be underestimated, and thus, as we reflect on how to address this, we should not look at it as an incident, but come up with strategic interventions that address climate change holistically and not just addressing concerns of a river bursting its banks. That's where, like the example you started with, River Nyamwamba has been doing this for the whole of this decade, the last decade. Now we've started a new one. And people continue to respond sporadically to address what has happened and not to look at it strategically and say, what is the long-term solution to this? What is the root cause? Initially, when River Nyamwamba started, before Nyamugasani started also flooding, it was alleged that Klembe mines, while it was being operated, they shifted the river channel and used bunkers in the mountains to create ridges where the river wouldn't burst. But eventually it burst these banks and it started flooding. So as it continued, more rivers, even those that had not been tampered with in the past, started bursting its banks, which only showed that the cause is the rains happening up in the mountains, that we no longer have swamps in any of those valleys because people have reclaimed them, and also the issue of deforestation, concerns to do with erosion that results into silting of rivers and they become less deep, that has continually resulted into these floods. There is also the cause of sporadic rains. It's been, I think, a month or two ago when Lake Victoria started extending its shores, NEMA and the Ministry of Water said we were actually not yet in the rainy season, but the rains were already coming contrary to the expected time, which is April, June, when the rains were started. But we had rains in Jan and when we were expecting sunshine. So these climatic changes are partly to blame for what we are seeing right now. And unfortunately, people have lived in the flood plains of these rivers for so many years. it's only coming to haunt now. And as we think of what we can do, it's not about just those who are being affected because they encroached. That's another myth that I think we need to address. Kilembe Valley in Kasese, which flooded last week twice, has always been inhabited. So it's not that these people came and started encroaching on the spaces for the river. The same applies with Nyamugasani and other rivers in Kasese that flooded. There are people that have, yes, encroached on the on some of the buffer zones, but also even those that had respected the buffer zones continue to be affected.
Let's talk about desilting of some of these rivers, because I think it rarely lies within the confines, and I mean it lies on the whims and fancies of government or even the ministry or even its agencies. Has there been any kind of deliberate effort either from the MDAs or from civil society to call for desilting of such rivers?
There's really not been an effort that I know of, because most of the, until a problem comes to haunt, not many people act on it, because in most cases we are reactionary. We wait for the problem to happen and then we come up with solutions. But fortunately, I think for Lake Victoria, there's always been, I think Uganda is said to have a machine for desilting the lake, but it's only one, and currently I think in Jan there were reports that it was borrowed by Kenya to desilt on their side. So for the rivers, there's not been any effort that I'm aware of to desilt rivers, but for the lake, it's always been planned, but it has not been giving as much results as we think, because Lake Victoria is said to be a shallow lake. It's on average 40 meters deep, and with still the same problem of silting, the many rivers that bring water to Lake Victoria bring with them silt, and ultimately cause a lot of dumping of eroded soil. And due to that, you find even the machine that we have cannot serve the purpose, cannot undo what is being done by about 15 major rivers and thousands of small streams which bring water into the lake.
About some of the natural resources to do include the rivers and the lakes, how comes you've not been at least heard on any fora making noise about some of them?
Whereas the specifics may not be rivers, but the campaigns that have been run by Accord and many other partners that are doing this work include campaigns on forestation, because silting is as a result of erosion. Erosion is as a result of deforestation. So if, say, Mount Rwenzori now has no more tree cover, then when it rains, all the soil is eroded into the rivers and the streams. So when Accord is campaigning for reforestation and protection of forested areas, it's by implication saying we should protect the forest so that we don't cause erosion and ultimately silt the rivers. The same applies with swamps. Most of the swamps were being used as reservoirs for water, that runoff water, where it first spends time in the swamps, and then sometimes the sun comes. If you have a swamp in your neighborhood, or if you've come across swamps, during the dry season, these swamps are almost dry land. And then in the rainy season, they keep this water until the sun comes and evaporates it. So even any campaign about swamps is by implication, say, protecting the lake from what would happen if the swamp is not there, that is keeping the water for a time until it evaporates back into the atmosphere. So we might have not had targeted campaigns saying, let's fight against erosion and silting of the lake, but there are a number of other interventions that we can confidently say, if the measures we proposed in the past had been complied with, then we would not be having this challenge. The issue of enforcement of climate laws and regulations. and other environmental protection laws and ordinances. It's said that lakes have buffers, and NEMA has standards of how far people should construct and which kind of construction should be within which distance from the lake. But we've in the past seen people literally reclaiming the lake, where they dry part of the land, they dump soil and sand in the lake to reclaim land, not just encroaching on the buffer but extending the shore deep into the lake. And these structures have certificates of approval from NEMA and construction permits from whichever regulatory body is giving them construction permits. So the failure to enforce these and be able to advise, because the relevant government ministries like NEMA and Ministry of Water and other bodies that certify development should be able to advise or even not approve certain structures in certain proximities, so that in the end we protect the people from the risks that come with it. So there's been some campaigns, back to your question, if there's been any effort, but these efforts were measures about 2 or 3 steps before coming to where we are, where we're saying protect the forest, you will protect the mountain, you will stop erosion, and the rivers will remain as deep as they are and they will not burst their banks.
Let us speak about sensitization of the people not to settle within the highly risk areas. We're talking about areas around Kasese, the people that live in the gorges and in the valleys and lowlands of Kasese and Nyamwamba. The people who live in Sironko, the people who live in Bududa, have the sensitization campaigns flogged a dead horse?
I think these catastrophes themselves have been sensitization campaigns in their own right. When a landslide happens in Bududa, you don't need an NGO or a local leader to come and tell you that, hey, it's very dangerous to stay on this slope. Just the media coverage that comes with the impacts of that landslide is enough. Right now in Kasese, there are campaigns to support victims, and everyone in the district or even the neighboring districts and the country at large is aware of the havoc being wreaked by these rivers, meaning people are already put to notice. In law, they would call that constructive notice, where you've not been told expressly, but something significant has happened that from which you can deduce the need to refrain from doing certain things. So the campaigns, some organizations of course continue to carry campaigns, religious leaders use their platforms and cultural leaders, but these incidents alone send a message. So I think people settling in these high risk areas is not an issue of them not knowing the risks posed, but it's one of these two. Either the economic gain they get, where you find it's a business and all they want is space. We know right now there is, with all due respect to the owners, there are millers that constructed a mill at Busega in the swamp. Everyone has seen that swamp. If you've been to Busega, everyone always knew it's a swamp, and swamps are not owned, swamps are public areas, but it has been used for that because the person needed space, and they know once they have that space, they'll be able to make their business. And right now it's booming. So that need to make money by using protected areas is one of the incentives. And the second is the lack of alternative, because people have lived there, and right now land is very scarce and expensive. You find unless they are relocated, there is no other option they can do to be able to get themselves the same size of land and continue to live their lives as they did. And the Bududa case is actually the best example where people have failed to live. Even those for whom alternative land has been provided, I think about 5 years ago they had proposed that they take them to Chiriandongo in the reserve, and they refused to go there, saying that's a different landscape. They are used to mountainous landscapes. They got them places within the region in Bugisu, but the uptake has not been as government would have thought, that the moment they give them alternative land, everyone will shift. Yeah, so sometimes it's people's attachment to the land, or beyond the area that is being hit. For me, who's a Mukonjo, I will always want to stay in the district. So unless you're giving me something within the district, maybe I will find it hard to move to land that you've given me in Mbarara, because I think I may not be able to stay well with the pastoralists, because for me, I'm a farmer. Their cows will come to my gardens. There are very many social, economic concerns that these people face and cause them to hold back. And the recommendation would be back to the strategic approach in addressing these challenges and looking at climate change as a whole, but also undertaking studies. We are privileged here at Accord, and we are accredited for taking cutting-edge research, where maybe Accord can be engaged, or we work with partners to assess the conditions in which people are living, the social cultural issues that make them remain attached, and come up with solutions for them before talking shifting. Otherwise, without coming up with a structured approach that addresses the reasons for which these people fail to move, you can buy land elsewhere and they keep the land there, but also retain the land from which you're trying to relocate them, because you've not addressed the underlying social, cultural, and sometimes economic issues.
Okay, for the side of the policymakers, how manageable, or how may we be able to manage the trade-off between the economic gain that is attached to construction in such areas? Because honestly, some of these hotels look magnificent. Some of them that have been built on the shores of Lake Victoria, the beaches look beautiful. There is a very big plant by the National Water and Sewage Corporation. How can we manage the economic gain that is being able, the one that is being derived from construction in such areas, vis-a-vis having a very good environment that we can all gain from?
In the end, someone interested in investing will always find an alternative place to invest, in that we may not lose the economic gain that would come by people investing in these areas. They can have alternative places. We've had, if I could use the example of the oil and gas sector, there was environment and social impact assessments for the projects these companies are carrying. And some of the proposals we are saying is, in undertaking these assessments, they should bear in mind the need to have alternative locations, alternative proposals, that in case this cannot be approved for whichever reasons, then we can use alternative B. And that's why the National Environment Act proposes undertaking of environment impact assessments before projects that have an impact on nature are undertaken. So if you have a proper environment and social impact assessment, you as a business will know that in the short run, you're going to make money, and also government will benefit economically, as you're suggesting. But in the long run, there are hotels which there are hotels in Entebbe where they literally showed water. The lake has now entered their dining halls. The lake is in the hotel rooms. What money are they making now? It's all a loss. Actually, in the long run, both the hotels lose the money, but also government loses, because right now they can no longer pay the taxes we've been getting from them because there's no business. So ultimately, we shouldn't be hoodwinked by the need to make a short-term gain and suffer in the long run. And also, these encroachments are partly contributing to climate change. So it's becoming cyclic, where we encroach and disrupt the environment, and then the environment riots, in quotes, and disrupts our investment. But we don't learn from that, and we go to the next place and still invest and negatively impact nature, and it comes back to haunt us. So it's always better to choose not to disrupt nature in the first place, so that your investment can also benefit from nature.
I've heard that the civil society organizations were up in arms about the environmental assessment and impact when it came to the East African crude oil pipeline, the Chilenga and the Kingfisher. How did that stop? How far is that?
At the moment, for the East African crude oil pipeline, once the environment impact assessment was presented, as civil society we came together and reviewed the report and gave our recommendations of the things we think need to be addressed before the pipeline is undertaken, is constructed. Fortunately, both NEMA and the developers of the East African crude oil pipeline, that is Total and Tullow and CNOOC, took our proposals in good faith, thanks to the media that amplified them, and a number of actions were done, a number of remedial actions were done to revise the technology, to revise the designs, to revise some of the things that they were going to do in order to accommodate the environment we were fighting to protect. Yeah, so they've not yet been approved yet by NEMA, but we are confident that there's been a number of steps that were taken to address the concerns we raised. And we hope when NEMA ultimately approves, it will take in consideration these proposals of ours as conditions for companies that will be constructing the pipeline.
In conclusion, we've been hearing of the strategic approach to management of some of these catastrophes. We've been hearing of the holistic look for the entire management of some of these environmental change actions and some of these catastrophes that keep on happening. Could you just help us break it down? How does that kind of strategic plan look ideologically from the point of view of some of these civil society organizations and the environmental change activists?
That is quite a big question you're asking for a conclusion because it would require as much time as we've spent. But strategically planning means we are not looking at the short term, which is 2-3 years, or medium term, which is 5 years, but we are looking at 7 to 10 years. So every 10 years, different ministries, departments, and agencies come up with their strategic plans. And these plans are supposed to lay measures that are going to eventually be fulfilled by the annual ministerial policy statements and plans and budgets, so that every year when you're going to Parliament to ask for them from Parliament money, it's to contribute to a plan that you've already seen where it's going in the long run. And for climate change, there is no better strategic plan or source for information for a strategic plan than the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015, which lays out the risk that the climate is facing, and they give each country quotas according to the Paris Agreement. Each country is given certain measures that it has to take in order to support the rest of the global community to combat climate change. So the starting point in terms of proposal to government would be for us to extract our responsibilities and plans of action from the Paris Agreement and act on them. Ensure that we are trying as much as possible to reduce pollution, emissions, and other things, but also on a smaller level, enforcement of the laws that we have. And that's one thing most civil society continue to campaign for, because the laws already provide for most of the things that are in these international instruments, but we don't enforce them. So if we can ensure that there is enough funding for NEMA to enforce. Right now you find NEMA has issues of other entities, especially in the oil and gas sector. You find There are issues of resources, issues of capacity in terms of staffing to be able to police every sensitive area. So if they can be well funded to be able to enforce and ensure that everyone who is developing in sensitive areas respects and protects the environment, then we can have the best. But if it's to continue to release so much money, which is now the difference between strategic planning and ad hoc planning, where once Kasese has happened, River Nyamwamba has burst its banks, for some reason, all the money is going, NEMA is going to get whatever it needs to address this problem in the short run, so that by July, the dust has settled, and then NEMA will not get this support again for the next God knows how many months until it needs them. But strategic planning would require that if you discover there is need for Kasese district to have maybe earth-moving machines and graders to desilt the rivers, then don't do it only when the rocks have run into the streets of Kasese town. As I'm sure you've seen photos where the river has moved huge rocks as big as this table into the streets and on people's buildings. They are going to send their machinery. Ministry of Works will work with the Ministry of Water and Environment and everything and the district, and they clean up. But these machines will not remain either in the district, or if they remain, there is no fuel, there is no manpower, they are all excuses until you need them again. But strategically, you should be able to keep them on standby. You should be able to do the desilting we were talking about at individual level. If we can have people planting more trees, avoiding wetlands, because wetlands, like we said, help to keep this excess water that would result into floods. Slowly, maybe in a year or 2 or 3 or 4, back to the long-term target, we can solve the problem. But otherwise, if we continue having ad hoc response only when things happen, we try to plant trees, and there are a few people planting trees for 6 months, and then they use them for firewood when there is no rain coming, we shall continue to have these problems. But let's have long-term solutions so that we help to protect both the people and the environment.
Final
Yeah.
take from you.
My final take is that first I would like to take this opportunity to send a message of sympathy to the families and individuals affected, both in Kasese and also on the shores of Lake Victoria. That what they are going through, we understand, but there is little we can do. And I propose that going forward, this should be a lesson to the relevant ministries and departments and agencies to always sustain every measures that they come up with, and not just take sporadic responses every time there is a catastrophe. Because we've learned that as you opened this afternoon, Kulembe and River Nyamwamba and River Nyamugasani have been doing what they are doing for many years, but the response always lasts 2 months until the next. So if we can have relevant MDAs taking serious what has to be done, that will be good. And I implore people that beyond the natural, the reaction of nature that is hitting us, we are also faced with the threat of COVID-19 currently. Let's listen to the measures the Ministry of Finance and Office of the Prime Minister and other relevant agencies are putting in place, because we need first to be alive before we can protect ourselves from the vagaries of nature. So stay safe, stay at home, wash your hands, and do all those measures that they are saying, because without that, we could have this pandemic and the lockdown extending for so many more months as it has been speculated by many. Thank you.
Right there you have it. Weather vagaries and changes in the climate are one of the things that Uganda is suffering under the heavy weight of. Can we adopt a strategic plan to manage some of these weather changes? Can we have that kind of planning that at least seeks to even re-emphasize and prepare for the next day apart from ad hoc? Can we be more proactive than reactive more than ever before? Because when we do not, nature will hit and it will continue hitting. And for us, members of the Fourth Estate, will always be here to report the same stories, same script, each and every other time. If we can avoid this, maybe we can be able to avoid the negative consequences of weather vagaries, call it climate change. Well, as we get to take a closer look at how COVID-19 is impacting our country, our dear country, it also becomes very imperative that we also take a closer look at some of the other things that are affecting the livelihoods or human life, at least here in the country, which include the changing patterns of the weather that is leading to some of the rivers actually bursting their banks, River Nyamwamba and Nyamugasani, plus the waters of Lake Victoria that are going up to even surpass the 1964 levels. Now, what comes in as a remedy for the people that survive, at least on the shoreline, and those that live on some of the banks of some of those rivers? And that is a heartful discussion that I had with James Muhindo right at the Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment Accord. And that is a discussion that seeks to at least address some of the things and point out to some of the loopholes that are within our environmental conservation realm that we seek to also intend to have a big conversation about the way we look at the environment and the way we conserve the human resource, the natural resources, because human lives really dwell on these things. And now it becomes very imperative that we also take a closer look at the fact that when Mother Nature strikes, it really strikes hard, and when it comes to claim its own, it takes it all. And definitely we just can't be more than the experts, more than some of these natural resources. The natural resources are the experts for themselves, and now we just pour out our hearts for those people that have been able to lose a couple of their things, courtesy of the same things that relate to environmental change or climate change that has been able to lead to a number of losses, at least for the people that construct and those that had investments, at least in some of these areas. Prior we conclude, it becomes very imperative that we take a closer look at the figures on how COVID-19 is impacting the entire world from the home of facts and figures, Smart24. Now we take you closer to look at some of those figures and how the entire globe is performing before we settle to the region, which is the East African region, and take a closer look at the continent and Uganda. Let us kickstart with the US. The US is having 1,443,397 cases of COVID-19, and you'll be able to take a closer look at the US still topping the charts in terms of having the highest numbers of COVID-19. When we continue, Russia is coming second at 272,043 cases of COVID-19, and that all is compiled for you by the Johns Hopkins University. When we continue to the United Kingdom is third on the list, having 236,004 cases, and the global recovered stand at 1,049 cases. The deaths are still staggering at 34,078. When we move over to Spain, fourth on the list, standing at 230,698 cases. Those that have been able to recover are 146,446. The deaths are still high at 27,507. When we move over to Italy, standing 30th on the list, 223,885 cases. Those that have been able to recover stand at 120,205 cases. The deaths are still also high. Brazil follows next on the list. You'll be able to see Brazil standing at 220,291 cases. The ones that have been able to recover are 84,970. The deaths stand at 14,962. France follows next at 179,630 cases. Those that have been able to recover are 60,562 cases. The deaths are still staggering at 27,532 cases. Germany is standing at 175,699 cases. Those that have been able to recover stand at 151,597 cases. The deaths are over 7,000, standing at 7,913. Turkey, second last on the list, is standing at 146,457 cases. The deaths are high at 4,055, and the recoveries are over 106,000. Iran follows next at 118 cases, 392, and the recoveries stand at 93,147 cases. The deaths are still standing at 6,937 cases. Last on the list on the top 10 is India, standing at 86,595 cases. Those that have been able to recover stand at 30,786 cases, and the deaths are high at 2,760 cases. And that is how the world is performing generally, at least from the home of the facts and figures. Now, when we take a closer look at how Uganda is performing, as of now, we have 203 cases of COVID-19 registered here in our motherland, the Pearl of Africa, Uganda, and that is an update that we can get to give you. But also, Kenya is still having high cases of COVID-19 at the time we get to speak, standing at over 781 total cases of COVID-19, with 452 active. You'll be able to take a closer look that 45 are deceased, and others were announced just this morning, with 284 recovered, and that is how Kenya is performing. When we move over to Tanzania, Tanzania is standing at 509 total cases at the time we get to speak, 305 of them still active as of now, 21 deceased and 183 recoveries, and that is how Tanzania is performing. The Republic of Rwanda is standing at 287 total cases, 110 active as of now, 0 deceased, 177 recoveries, and that is how Rwanda is performing. South Sudan following here with 236 total cases, standing at 228 active cases as of now, 4 deceased and 4 recoveries, and that is how South Sudan is performing. Burundi following here with 15 total cases of COVID-19, 7 active, 1 deceased, and 7 recoveries, and that is how the East Africa region is performing. We'll just dare to inform you of each and every other changes that will take place when it comes to these figures, because they keep on changing day in and day out. Some of the African countries that have been able to register new cases of COVID-19, at least as of today, when we try to look at covidvisualizer.com here, I'm looking at the Democratic Republic of Congo, and yet another country that is in West Africa, the one that will be ensuring that at least we inform you across all our social media platforms to ensure that we keep you in the know of all the things that really concern COVID-19. But keep safe and keep home. Ensure that you wash your hands, watch over your movements, and watch over the people that you get into close contact with. Keep that good social distance. Ensure that you stay closer and far away from, stay closer to your hand sanitizer, and be far away from the things that jeopardize the social distance between you and all the other people that are at least within your home. From me and the entire production team, we are heavily indebted to the fact that at least you kept it smart 24 right from the time we began the broadcast until this particular hour where we seek to bid valediction to you. Production, editors, cameramen, we continue to thank you, and this is a journey in which we strive to reach for the highest global standards for business broadcasting. Dan Control Room, Chris Editor, Joshua, Madrin, and the entire direction team, thank you so much for ensuring that we nail this. And until tomorrow, enjoy the rest of the weekend.
2024.